السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب زدنا علما رب زدنا علما رب زدنا علما نافعا آمين. المقدمة السابعة. Seventh مقدمة. العلم الشرعي وسيلة إلى عبادة الله. The Sharia knowledge is a means to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now Imam al-Shātibi rahimahullah is explaining the purpose of acquiring the Sharia knowledge. In the previous muqaddimat, he talked about the meaning of knowledge, the sources of knowledge, and the best methodology of thinking and acquiring the Sharia knowledge. And in that, he connected it with some important qualities of this ummah, the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Arabs. And we talked about that in the previous two muqaddimat. Now he is explaining the purpose of Sharia knowledge. Al-ilmu al-shar'i. We are talking about the knowledge which is Shari. We are not talking about mutlaq knowledge, any type of knowledge. We are qualifying it with al-Shari. So here the discussion is about the knowledge which was revealed from the heavens and the knowledge of our religion. For this reason, we said in the previous muqaddimat that philosophy, science, human knowledge has its importance and relevance, and it has its benefit in a particular area. But when it comes to religion and Islam, our Deen, we must understand the unique concepts and the epistemology of our religion, of our Deen. How to understand the mustalahat, how to understand the terminology and the concepts. What is the Quranic method of explaining the concepts? What is the prophetic method of acquiring the knowledge? So on and so forth. So we are talking about the Sharia. Al-ilmu al-shar'i wasilatun ila ibadatillah. It is a means to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Sharia knowledge is not an end in itself. It is a wasila. It is a means. And this is what Imam al-Shātibi wants to explain in this muqaddimah, so that we understand the importance of the amal, practice, which is the fruit of this knowledge. And for this reason, he explained in the previous muqaddimat that any principle, any qa'idah, any asl, any foundation which does not lead to practice, which does not lead to benefit practically in this dunya and akhirah, is of no use in the Sharia knowledge. It may have its relevance, it may have its importance in a different area, but in Islam, it does not have any benefit. So now, in explaining the purpose of acquiring the Sharia knowledge, or the purpose of the Sharia knowledge, he emphasizes this point again by saying that the Sharia knowledge is a means to something else. If it does not lead to that, it is of no use. It does not have any virtue by itself. Knowledge in Islam has fadl and virtue, importance because it leads to something else. And this meaning has been emphasized in the Quran, in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and in the Kalam of the early Salaf. كل علم شرعي فطلب الشارع له إنما يكون حيث هو وسيلة إلى التعبد به لله تعالى. Every Sharia knowledge فطلب الشارع له إنما يكون حيث هو وسيلة إلى التعبد به لله تعالى. The Shari', the legislator, Allah, who has legislated that knowledge, He demands it not because it is an end in itself, but rather because it is a wasila, it is a means to ta'abbud, it is a means to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are loose translations in English. The reality is that terminology and concepts can never be translated. They must be understood in original Arabic. But we are forced to translate in order to at least grasp the basic meaning of the terms. Okay, so knowledge is a means to ta'abbud. Knowledge in Islam is not research, which leads to research. Knowledge in Islam is not information, which does not have any practical benefit. Knowledge in Islam is a means to ta'abbud. So the first purpose of acquiring knowledge is to please Allah, or acquiring knowledge in itself is the best form of worship. It is the best form of ibadah. For this reason, there are many scholars who are of this opinion that after the obligations in Islam, the best form of ibadah is acquiring knowledge. So acquiring knowledge is better than voluntary prayer, voluntary charity, voluntary hajj, even voluntary jihad. We're not talking about obligations. Nothing, no amal can be compared with obligations, of course, particularly the pillars of Islam. But after obligations, the best form of knowledge is acquiring, the best form of ibadah is acquiring knowledge. This is the opinion of many great scholars. So knowledge is a wasila, knowledge is a means to the worship of Allah. La min jihatin ukhra. It does not have any other purpose. فَإِنْ ظَهَرَ فِيهِ اعْتِبَارُ جِهَةٍ أُخْرَى فَبِالتَّبْعِ وَالْقَصْدِ الثَّانِي. If any other purpose or any other benefit appears in acquiring knowledge, the Sharia knowledge, if it leads to any other benefit other than ta'abbud, other than pleasing Allah, worshipping Allah, it is فَبِالتَّبْعِ وَالْقَصْدِ الثَّانِي. It will be the secondary purpose. It is not the primary purpose. La bil qasdil awwali. It is not the primary purpose, because the primary purpose, al qasdul awwal, of acquiring knowledge or knowledge itself, is ta'abbud. This is a very important principle explained by Imam al-Shātibi, particularly for our times. The times of knowledge explosion, information explosion. And this principle is very beneficial for the students of Islamic knowledge. So we must differentiate between the knowledge which is the foundation, the knowledge which is secondary, the meanings of the Quran which are applied and which are beneficial practically in our life, and the knowledge of grammar which is used to understand the meaning of the Quran or ayat of the Quran. We must differentiate between the two. The thamara is not an-nahu was-sarf. The thamara is not these ulumul alah, the tools. The tools are used to make something. The tools lead to something else. They are not the end in itself. So we must differentiate between sulbul ilmi. Inshallah, this classification will come in the next muqaddimat. Sulbul ilmi, the foundation of knowledge, and mulahul ilmi, the knowledge which is secondary, and it's helpful, it's beneficial, but it is not the primary thamara, it is not the primary fruit. By this understanding and classification, we can reap the best benefits from knowledge. Okay, so this is the claim of Imam al-Shātibi. This is the main principle we can understand from the 7th Muqaddimah. Then he moves to Adillah. He gives some proofs for this claim. وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, the evidences or the proof of it is the following. And he has explained some important points here. Mentioned briefly in the notes, and the explanation is in the original work. He says, number one, ما تقدم في المسألة قبل, what has been explained before, أن كل علم لا يفيد عملا فليس في الشرع ما يدل على استحسانه. Any knowledge, any principle which does not give the benefit of amal, which does not help us practically, benefits us practically in our life, فليس في الشرع ما يدل على استحسانه. We don't find any praise of it in the Sharia. Sharia has not praised it. It may be praiseworthy in a different field, in a different area, but in the Sharia, the knowledge which is praiseworthy is the knowledge which leads to amal, which is helpful in our life. وَلَوْ كَانَ لَهُ غَايَةٌ أُخْرَى شَرْعِيَّةٌ لَكَانَ مُسْتَحْسَنًا شَرْعًا. If it had any other purpose, it would be praiseworthy in the Sharia. وَلَوْ كَانَ مُسْتَحْسَنًا شَرْعًا لَبَحَثَ عَنْهُ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الصَّحَابَةِ وَالتَّابِعِينَ. And if knowledge had any other purpose, which was praiseworthy, the Sahaba, the early Muslims, pious predecessors, would definitely follow it. They would acquire it. So they have not acquired it. We don't find any other purpose of knowledge in the practice of the Sahaba and Tabi'in other than ta'abbud. It means this is the only reason of praise in the Sharia. And if the Sharia has praised the knowledge because it leads to amal. وَذَلِكَ غَيْرُ مَوْجُودٍ. And this is non-existent. The knowledge which does not lead to amal. It is non-existent in Islam. فَمَا يَلْزَمُ عَنْهُ كَذَلِكَ. And whatever leads to it is also non-existent. Okay, this has been explained before. And by amal, we have explained, by amal, Imam al-Shātibi means both amal of the heart and amal of the limbs. So amal of the heart is perhaps more important in our times, the times of materialism. We need to acquire the ilm which changes us inside, personality development, which makes our personality strong, which strengthens our spiritual heart. And we know the limbs follow the king. As some scholars say, the heart is the king and the limbs, the body parts, they are the soldiers. Whatever the king commands, the soldiers obey. So this is something very important here. The second dalil which he gives is أن الشرع إنما جاء للتعبد. Sharia has come for only one purpose, which is ta'abbud, ibadah of Allah. Sharia does not have any other purpose. So other purposes will be secondary. The primary purpose of the Sharia is ta'abbud, to teach us how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But of course, we should not restrict and confine the meaning of ta'abbud in some areas only. Ibadah is a comprehensive term. As Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has beautifully explained it in his treatise Al-Ubudiyyah. He says, in explaining ibadah, ibadah is ismun jami'un likulli ma yuhibbuhu Allah wa yardahu. Ibadah is a comprehensive term for every action which pleases Allah. Min al-aqwali wal-a'mali al-zahirati wal-batina. Whether they are sayings of the tongue, actions of the limbs, apparent or hidden. Any amal. So basically this definition means that whatever we do as human beings, whatever action we do, it falls in the definition of ibadah. So ibadah is a comprehensive term. We should not restrict it in some areas. This is a problem. in the Muslim thought in our times, restricting the comprehensive meaning of the Islamic terms and confining it. For example, when we use the term ibadah, when we hear this term, what comes to mind? What is the first meaning which comes to mind? The famous ibadat: prayer, hajj, fasting, zakah, recitation of the Quran, dua, charity, fulfilling the rights of human beings. These are the main meanings which come to mind. Have you ever thought that one of the greatest forms of ibadah is tafakkur? At-tafakkur. Tafakkur. Reflection. Thinking. Thinking in itself, reflecting. Reflection which is fruitful reflection, reflecting on our conditions, changing ourselves for better, reflecting on the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, different ways of reflection. It's a great form of ibadah. Reflection is an ibadah like the prayer, the physical ibadat like hajj, fasting, so on and so forth. Now, this is a very this never comes to mind when we use the term ibadah, right? At-tafakkur. In spite of the fact that some great muhaddithun in their works of hadith, when they classify the ahadith into the chapters, there are many muhaddithun who have this chapter in their books of hadith, the chapter of tafakkur. And in that chapter, they mention the ayat about tafakkur, ahadith about tafakkur. For example, Imam An-Nawawi, rahimahullah, in his work Riyadus Salihin, which is a compilation of ahadith about adab, about etiquettes. In the beginning chapters, you will find the chapter of tafakkur. Tafakkur is a great ibadah. So we must be careful in using the terms Islamic terminology. We must understand its meaning properly. If it is a comprehensive term, we should not restrict it, confine it. If it is a specific term, khas, we should not make it am. This is a very important point in methodology. So he says, Anna shar'a innama ja'a bit-ta'abbud. Sharia has come with ta'abbud, teaching us to worship Allah. The purpose of the Quran in mentioning the signs of the universe, mentioning the scientific facts, is ta'abbud. Quran is not a book of science. Okay, so we should always focus on the primary purpose. وَهُوَ الْمَقْصُودُ مِنْ بَعْثَةِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّلَامِ. And it is the purpose of sending the prophets. التعبد كقوله تعالى يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم ألف لام را كتاب أحكمت آياته ثم فصلت من لدن حكيم خبير ألا تعبدوا إلا الله. Like these ayat. There are many other ayat, and the purpose of sending the prophets and this deen is ta'abbud. So it is the primary purpose. Let me see if we have some additional points which I have noted from the original work. Yes, he has given a lot of examples, many ayat. You can go back to the original work. Okay. Number 3, he says, ما جاء من الأدلة الدالة على أن روح العلم هو العمل. All the evidences, which I don't need to mention it here one by one, these evidences are apparent. على أن روح العلم هو العمل. The ruh, the soul of knowledge is amal. Again, he is emphasizing this important point. روح العلم هو العمل. روح العلم هو العمل. Okay, the soul of knowledge is action, amal. And again, amal means amal of the heart and amal of the limbs. وَإِلَّا without this, without amal, فَالْعِلْمُ عَارِيَةٌ وَغَيْرُ مُنْتَفَعٍ بِهِ. Ilm is of no use and no benefit. So if ilm does not lead to amal, it's of no use and no benefit. Again, he's emphasizing this point, and in the original work, he has given some ayat and aqwal and kalam of the early pious predecessors, which does not need any mention. For example, this ayah, فَقَدْ قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. Indeed, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Indeed, it is only ulama who fear Allah the most. So see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has connected ilm with khashya, with fear of Allah. And we have many sayings of the early salaf. Some of them would say, كَفَى بِالْخَشْيَةِ عِلْمًا. Khashya, fear of Allah, is sufficient knowledge. وقال سفيان الثوري, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, who is one of the greatest scholars from the early salaf, he would say, إنما يتعلم العلم إنما يتعلم العلم ليتقى به الله. Knowledge is acquired so that Allah is feared by that knowledge, so that we use that knowledge in to please Allah and to fear Allah by fulfilling the obligations, by fulfilling the commands and abstaining from the prohibitions. وَإِنَّمَا فَضْلُ الْعِلْمِ عَلَى غَيْرِهِ لِأَنَّهُ يُتَّقَى اللَّهُ بِهِ. Ilm has virtue only for this reason. The only reason for the virtue of ilm is that it is used to fear Allah, and it is used to apply taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, ilm does not, information does not have any benefit. And this is very important. So for example, an encyclopedia of knowledge and information, but if he is not fulfilling, we don't see this knowledge in his practice, he's not fulfilling the obligations, we don't see any voluntary actions, we don't see him or her as a good person who is beneficial for the society, who works for the sake of Islam, to please Allah. When we compare this person with an illiterate Muslim who understands only basics of Deen, but in his practice we see Islam, we see amal, we see the Islamic character, we see the Islamic personality. This non-lettered, unlettered and illiterate Muslim is better than a person who is an encyclopedia of information, because information is not ilm. That's why I said, I think in one of the previous sessions, I said that the best method of acquiring knowledge is by suhbah, by companionship. And this was the method adopted by the early Muslims. Inshallah, the discussion about the methods of acquiring knowledge will come in the next muqaddimah. Because by company, you adopt the knowledge practically. You understand it, you imbibe knowledge in your personality. Okay, وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ يُحَقِّقْ. All these evidences which have come in detail in the original work, here we have only mentioned the summary. وَكُلُّ ذَلِكَ يُحَقِّقْ. All these evidences, they prove أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ وَسِيلَةٌ مِنَ الْوَسَائِلِ. Ilm is just a means from, it's a means to something noble and something else. لَيْسَ مَقْصُودًا لِنَفْسِهِ مِنْ حَيْثُ النَّظَرُ الشَّرْعِي. From the Shari perspective, it is not a purpose in itself. Ilm is a wasila, it's not a purpose. So ilm is a wasila, it's not maqsood. وَإِنَّمَا هُوَ وَسِيلَةٌ إِلَى الْعَمَلِ. It is a means to the action, to the practice. وَكُلُّ مَا وَرَدَ فِي فَضْلِ الْعِلْمِ. And all ayat, ahadith, nusus, texts which have come in the virtue of knowledge, فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ ثَابِتٌ لِلْعِلْمِ مِنْ جِهَةِ مَا هُوَ مُكَلَّفٌ بِالْعَمَلِ بِهِ. The virtue, all these texts and evidences are have come in the virtue of that ilm which leads to this purpose, which leads to amal. So ilm is a wasila, it is not a maqsood. Then he says, لِلْعِلْمِ قَصْدًا. Ilm has two purposes. Asliyun wa tabi'un. The primary purpose and the secondary purpose. And no one denies that ilm has any form of knowledge. Here we're talking about Islamic knowledge, Sharia knowledge, the knowledge of Deen. Any form of knowledge, it has many benefits. But here we are only exploring the main purpose, the main fruit, or the primary purpose, or understanding the differentiation between the primary purpose and the secondary purpose. ولا ينكر فضل العلم ولا ينكر فضل العلم في الجملة إلا جاهل. The virtue of knowledge is not negated generally. All forms of knowledge, beneficial knowledge, it is not negated except by an ignorant person. ولكن له قصد أصلي وقصد طابع. So we are not negating the virtue of knowledge, any knowledge which is beneficial for mankind, but we are only trying to understand the purpose of knowledge. So he says ولكن له قصد أصلي وقصد تابع. But knowledge has a primary qasd, primary purpose, and a secondary purpose. فالقصد الأصلي, the primary purpose is ما تقدم ذكره, what has been mentioned. The knowledge which leads to amal and ta'abbud. The primary purpose is ta'abbud, ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge, understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and implementing this knowledge in practice. وَأَمَّا التَّابِعُ, as far as the secondary purpose is concerned, the secondary purpose of knowledge, فَهُوَ الَّذِي يَذْكُرُهُ الْجُمْهُورُ مِنْ. From the secondary benefits, from the secondary purposes of knowledge, is what has been mentioned by Jumhur, by the majority of scholars, or by the majority people, human beings who understand the benefits of knowledge. So he has listed some secondary benefits of knowledge. Inshallah, we will talk about one of these benefits in detail. Number one, كَوْنُ صَاحِبِهِ شَرِيفًا. By knowledge, the one who acquires it, the one who acquires knowledge becomes noble, becomes sharif. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ فِي أَصْلِهِ كَذَلِكَ. In spite of the fact, even if he is not noble in his origin. So maybe he is from the downtrodden sections of the society. By knowledge, he becomes noble. Okay. Number two, وَأَنَّ تَعْظِيمَهُ وَاجِبٌ عَلَى جَمِيعِ الْمُكَلَّفِينَ. Respecting knowledge, glorifying knowledge, generally is necessary and obligatory on all mukallafin, all human beings who have been given legal responsibility. إِذْ قَامَ لَهُمْ مَقَامَ النَّبِيِّ. The respecting knowledge and the people of knowledge is wajib, because they stand at the position of the prophets. لأن العلماء ورثة الأنبياء, because ulama, scholars, are the inheritors of the prophets. So they are at the maqam, yani they are the inheritors of the prophets. Their mission is the mission of the prophets. So we must respect them, like we respect the mission, knowledge of the prophets alayhimus salam. Ulama are warathatul anbiya. This is a famous hadith. Number three, Jim. وَأَنَّ الْعِلْمَ جَمَالٌ. Ilm in itself is beauty. وَمَالٌ, and wealth. وَرُتْبَةٌ, and status. Means ilm leads to jamal, beauty, and it beautifies a person, makes him honorable. It leads to mal, by knowledge and skill, we acquire wealth. وَرُتْبَةٌ, status. لَا تُوَازِيهَا رُتْبَةٌ. There is no status which matches the status of knowledge. So knowledge has all these secondary benefits. No one denies that. No one denies that except a jahil, except an ignorant. وَأَهْلُهُ أَحْيَاءُ أَبَدَ الدَّهْرِ. The people of knowledge, they live till eternity. They never die, because their knowledge remains. إِلَى سَائِرِ مَا لَهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا مِنَ الْمَنَاقِبِ الْحَمِيدَةِ. Because their manaqib, their virtues, their good, praiseworthy virtues and qualities, they remain till the end times. And this is the best sadaqah jariyah. like the Prophet ﷺ has said in a famous hadith, the best sadaqah jariyah, the best charity which remains after the death of a person is ilmun yuntafa'u bihi, knowledge which benefits. So these are the secondary benefits of knowledge. فَذَلِكَ كُلُّهُ غَيْرُ مَقْصُودٍ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ الشَّرْعِي. But we must remember that all these benefits, they are not the primary purpose of the Sharia knowledge. غَيْرُ مَقْصُود. In the Sharia, there are secondary purposes. If you acquire, if you gain these benefits from knowledge, good. If you don't gain these benefits, there is no harm. We must understand the primary purpose. كما أنه غير مقصود من العبادة والانقطاع إلى الله تعالى. Like it is not, these benefits are not the purpose of ibadah and seclusion with Allah. So we don't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to acquire wealth, acquire status, acquire fame. If Allah gives us fame and our intention is good, sincere, if Allah gives us wealth, it is the ni'mah of Allah. We must thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. We must be grateful. We must practice gratitude. But it is not the primary purpose. وَإِنْ كَانَ صَاحِبُهُ يَنَالُهُ. In spite of the fact that the person who acquires knowledge, Allah gives him all these benefits. But still, they are not the maqsood. They are not the primary purpose. So this is the third, this is the fourth benefit of secondary benefit of acquiring knowledge. The fifth benefit is وَأَيْضًا, and also فَإِنَّ فِي الْعِلْمِ بِالْأَشْيَاءِ لَذَّةٌ لَا تُوَازِيهَا لَذَّةٌ. In knowledge of things, any knowledge, when you acquire knowledge, you understand the realities of different things, there is ladha, there is pleasure. لا توازيها لذة. No worldly pleasure can be compared with this pleasure. وهو مطلب خاص. And this is a specific benefit. This is a specific purpose. There are other benefits like he discussed, but this is something specific. برهانه التجربة التامة والاستقراء العام. And its evidence is التجربة التامة, perfect experience. And from experience, we can understand it, that if a person acquires the knowledge of a particular thing, he feels the pleasure in his nafs. فقد يطلب العلم يطلب العلم للتفقه به والتلذذ بمحادثته. Because ilm can be acquired for just talazzuz, pleasure. For pleasure. بمحادثته, pleasure in mentioning it. Yani when you're asked about a field of knowledge and you know that, you have knowledge of that field, and you mention, you give the answers, fatawa, or any other field, you feel the pleasure inside. For this reason, no human being likes to be attributed to ignorance, even if he is ignorant. All human beings, they like to be, this is the pleasure, they like to be attributed to knowledge. No human being likes to be attributed to ignorance. Okay, so this ladha. But this may be a benefit somehow, but this is not the primary purpose of acquiring knowledge. There is a very beautiful treatise of Imam Al-Razi, rahimahullah. I have niyyah about this masala, about the ladha, the pleasure, and I have niyyah of inshallah reading it with my students. Inshallah, if Allah gives us tawfiq, we will devise it into a course and read this treatise. I want to share it with you, inshallah. If you understand Arabic, or you can study it with the Shaykh. It's one of the greatest treatises you will ever study, by a great Imam who was a philosopher, who was a scientist, who was an expert in medicine also. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, a great scholar of 6th century. And even the Western scholars have benefited from him. It is this treatise by Imam al-Razi. He called it Risalatu Dhammi Ladhat ad-Dunya, vilifying the pleasures of dunya. This book is about pleasures, material pleasures. So Risalatu Dhammi Ladhat ad-Dunya. And in this treatise, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah, he explains the types of pleasures. And the crux of this risala is proving that the ni'am, the pleasures of dunya, the benefits of dunya, and the ni'am of this dunya, worldly ni'am, worldly pleasures, worldly benefits, worldly ni'am, they are, in reality, they are hardships and pains. And in the beginning, he has quoted a Mu'tazili scholar saying of a great Mu'tazili scholar, An-Nadham, when he was sick and someone visited him and he was sick, and he wanted to take a particular medicine which was very bitter. And this student asked him about his ahwal and conditions. He visited him. He replied, and he asked him, "How are you today, O Sheikh?" His reply was, "Adfa'u alamin bi alam." I am repelling hardships with hardships. I am repelling pains with pains. Okay? And this is the reality of dunya. In this dunya, you will not find any blessing which is pure. You will not find any benefit which does not contain hardship. So this is what he wants to prove. And he has beautifully classified the ladhat. And at the end, he says, you can see all these ladhat, which a human being considers ladhat, pleasure, benefit, and ni'mah. In reality, it is niqmah. It is hardship. The only pure blessings are the blessings of akhirah. This is a great philosophical treatise which you will ever read by Imam al-Razi rahimahullah. I have niyyah of studying it with my students, inshallah. Make dua that Allah gives us tawfiq of devising a course based on this. So he classifies the ladhat. And what he says is that basically even material blessings which we yearn for as a human being, the purpose behind that is these pleasures, the spiritual pleasures. For example, a person, he works hard in his life to construct a house, the best house in town. He gives the best efforts. He harms his health. He harms his akhirah. He earns money by halal, haram, all means to construct this house. And what is the purpose? The purpose is when the people in the town see this house, they praise the owner of the house. To earn this pleasure of praise, when they see the house, they say, "Wow, what a beautiful house." To earn this praise, this human being destroys his whole life. He harms his health, he harms his wealth, he harms his family. He does not have any time for the family to construct this house. This is one example. And what is the purpose behind? To earn this pleasure of praise. Okay, so this is what he explains. He says basically behind the material benefits or material blessings, you will always see human beings yearning for these spiritual praises, because satisfaction happens inside. Satisfaction does not, tuma'nina, satisfaction and tranquility, it has nothing to do with the physical body. It happens inside. Whatever we do by our physical efforts, it's all to to attain this inner tranquility, inner peace. Like some scholars, they say that in a human being, there are two parts, the physical body and the soul. The physical body is from alamul mushahada, this worldly realm. And the ruh, the soul, is from alamul malakut, from the heavenly realm. So whatever the physical body does, it is to gain the pleasure of the inner self. So you can see here, after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the muqaddimah, he says, I will discuss three types of ladhat, three types of pleasures in this treatise. فأولها في البحث عن حقائق اللذات الحسية, the tangible pleasures, the pleasures which can be acquired by the senses, by the body, physical, material pleasures. وثانيها, second is في البحث عن حقائق اللذات الخيالية, the intellectual or the imaginary, we can say, pleasures. And in that he talks about two types of pleasures: al-ri'asa, status, wan-nafadh, and authority, status, authority. It does not have any physical, it has a physical form. The king has authority, the ruler has authority, boss in a company has authority, but basically it is a spiritual pleasure which happens inside when you feel that authority. Okay, so this is the second type. The third type is an haqa'iq al-ladhat al-aqliyah, the aqli ladhat, the intellectual ladhat, the pleasures which are acquired by the aql. In that, this is what I wanted to discuss here. In that, he talks about ladhatul ilm wal ihata bi haqa'iq al-ashya, the pleasure of knowledge and encompassing the haqa'iq, the realities of things. Yani the pleasure a human being feels in understanding haqa'iq, realities. When you understand a particular thing, the pleasure of knowledge you feel is the best form of pleasure. And in all these three types of pleasures and ladhat, hissiya, physical, khayaliya, imaginary, or you can say spiritual, and aqliya, intellectual, he talks about the afat, the deficiencies and the faults and the weaknesses in these pleasures. They seem to be pleasures, but in reality they are hardships and full of afat, full of uyub, full of faults. They are not real pleasures. Okay, and in the last type, he also talks about theology, also talks about understanding, because the best form of knowledge is knowledge of Allah, ilahiyat. And there he talks about the different groups of human beings generally, and within Islam and Muslim history, people who try to understand Allah by using their aql. Okay, so this is a great treatise. If you have time, inshallah, and you know Arabic, please go through this treatise. At the end, Imam al-Razi, and he was a great philosopher. And we are not talking about a commoner, a great philosopher, expert of philosophy, medicine, science, and also a great scholar of Islam. What does he say? He says, after we have understood that all these ladhat, with the three types, all the types of ladhat, they are khissisa, mustahqara, despicable. They seem as pleasures, but in reality they are hardships and afat. And there is no pure path of acquiring these lazzat. And these pleasures, worldly pleasures, they are all impure. All worldly blessings are impure. So after we have understood it, we wish, he says here, فَلِهَذِهِ الْأَسْبَابِ, because of these reasons, نقول, we say, لَيْتَنَا, we wish that we had بَقِينَا عَلَى الْعَدَمِ الْأَوَّلِ, we had remained on nothingness. Yani we had not come to being. وَلَيْتَنَا مَا شَاهَدْنَا هَذَا الْعَالَمِ, we wish that we had never witnessed this world full of afat, full of faults, full of imperfections. وَلَيْتَ النَّفْسُ لَمْ تَتَعَلَّقْ بِهَذَا الْبَدَنِ. We wish that this nafs, soul, had never entered this body. وَفِي هَذَا الْمَعْنَى قُلْتُ. And in this meaning, explaining this meaning, I have some couplets. He says, نِهَايَةُ إِقْدَامِ الْأُقُولِ أُقَالُ. يعني there are some mistakes. This work has been edited by an Orientalist, so there are some mistakes in Arabic. نِهَايَةُ إِقْدَامِ الْأُقُولِ أُقَالُ وَأَكْثَرُ سَعْيِ الْعَالَمِينَ ضَلَالُ وَأَرْوَاحُنَا فِي وَحْشَةٍ مِنْ جُسُومِنَا وَحَاصِلُ دُنْيَانَا أَذًى وَوَبَالُ وَلَمْ نَسْتَفِدْ مِنْ بَحْثِ طُولِ عُمْرِنَا سِوَى أَنْ جَمَعْنَا فِيهِ قِيلَ وَقَالُوا وَقَمْ قَدْ رَأَيْنَا مِنْ رِجَالٍ وَدَوْلَةٍ فَبَادُوا جَمِيعًا مُسْرِعِينَ وَزَالُوا وَكَمْ مِنْ جِبَالٍ قَدْ عَلَتْ شرفاتها شرفاتها رجال فزالوا والجبال جبال. يعني he says the end of all this intellectual business and pleasures is no benefit. There is no benefit. That's why after these couplets, he says, after entering into these mada'iq, into these closed paths, understanding philosophy, all these realities, رأيت, I found al-aswaba wal-aslaha, the most correct and the most beneficial method in this bab, in this field, about understanding the higher realities of life, طريقة القرآن العظيم والفرقان الكريم, the method of the book of Allah, the method of the great Quran. Okay, see, this is the shahada, this is the testimony of one of the finest minds in our history. وَالْفَضْلُ مَا شَهِدَتْ بِهِ الْأَعْدَاءُ. And the fadl is what is witnessed even by the enemies, even enemies. The Western scholars, they understand and they praise Imam al-Razi, they understand the level he was at. This is his testimony, that the best method, the best way in practice, in ilm, in understanding the higher realities of life, anything, in methodology, is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But alimahu man alimahu wa jahilahu man jahilahu. Those who know it, they know it. Those who don't know it, they don't understand it. So this was about ladhatul ilm. Then he says these are benefits, but the best benefit, these are benefits, but they are secondary. They are khadiman lil qasd al asli. Yani if any secondary benefit we see in knowledge, if it serves the primary purpose, it is accepted. Otherwise, it is not accepted from the Sharia perspective, from the Islamic perspective. But then he gives some ahadith. I don't acquire this knowledge for fame, for riya, showing off. Whoever acquires knowledge for any other reason except to please Allah, he will not even find the fragrance of Jannah on the last day. So on and so forth. He has given some ayat of the Quran, ahadith, and sayings of the early Salaf, which are very famous about knowledge, about sincerity in knowledge. We will not go into that. Yani this is the summary of the 7th Muqaddimah. Inshallah, I encourage everyone to go through this risala of Imam al-Razi, Risalatun fi dhammi ladhat ad-dunya. It's very beneficial, particularly it's relevant for our times, when we are immersed from head to toe into materialism. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from knowledge which does not benefit. And the purpose of all these discussions is understanding our theory of knowledge, understanding Islamic epistemology. Inshallah, if you're taking the points and connecting it with the previous muqaddimat, the picture becomes very clear. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the pledges of dunya, halal pledges of dunya, and the real pledges, the pledges of akhirah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the best blessings in dunya and akhirah. Wallahu ta'ala alam, wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabil ummi. We'll stop here.